Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. Happy rainy Monday. Welcome to the Toledo Clubs of Toledo. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo's virtual meeting. It's Law Day, featuring Judge Christine Mayle of the 6th District Court of Appeals. But before we get started, I'll invite past President Chuck Mann for the reflection and John Clement to lead us as we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
This is called the Judge's Prayer. It was written by Judge Ralph A. McAllister on the occasion of taking the oath of office on the Common Pleas Court of Cuyahoga County, Ohio, on December 29th, 1976. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, the source of all wisdom and justice, we ask your continued blessing and guidance for this court, that it may always function with honor and integrity, that its pronouncements always be just, that its proceedings be conducted impartially for all those who come before it, and finally, that this court, in all its actions, preserve the peace and dignity, the rights and prerogatives, and the freedoms and morality of our people.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now we'll have the four-way test. First, is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Second, is it fair to all concerned?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendship?
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
And will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
And I ask all of you to continue to adhere to that so that we can be better Rotarians and better citizens. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, John. And as always, thank you, George. Also want to thank Toledo Metal Spinning, May's weekly meeting sponsor. Thank you, Rotarian Eric Fankhauser. I have some, just some remarks. As mentioned earlier, we have finalized our first back to meetings, live meetings on June 7th. We're going in person at the Toledo Club, practicing all their proper protocols. We will be asking you to RSVP for that meeting. And as I also mentioned, we're putting together a reservation system. We're not quite sure how many people it can hold, somewhere between, I want to say 60 and 80. But again, we're going to need you to RSVP for that meeting. So we're practicing proper protocols, etc. Also, I want to mention that we've finalized the date for a live event, our first live event in a very long time. It'll be Thursday, June 24th. From 4:30 to 7, please join us for a date at the National Museum of the Great Lakes. Again, that's June 24th, 4:30 to 7 at the National Museum of the Great Lakes. It'll be a fantastic event, and it will include a fire truck. Thank you, TAP 419. Now, let's have Judge Jack Zahari introduce today's speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce Judge Christine Mayle as our speaker today for Law Day. This is her 5th year on our State Court of Appeals. She serves with 4 other colleagues, and that courthouse, for those who don't know, is located in downtown on the corner of Spielbush and Cherry. It is a welcome to those approaching on the Greenbelt Parkway. That court serves Lucas County as well as 7 other surrounding counties. You have her formal resume from the Spoke. I thought I would tell you something you don't already know about her. The 3 things you can always find in her refrigerator are orange juice, eggs, and cashew walnut peanut butter, everything you need for breakfast. But if you really want to know about a judge, ask about what paperweights they may have in their office. Yes, we still use some paper. She has one paperweight that is from the floor of the Grand Central Terminal in New York City, a midtown landmark. After a renovation, you were able to obtain pieces of the floor, and for her, it is a special memory because her mother would walk that terminal to work, and her father actually worked on the terminal as an electrician when he was 17 years old. Indeed, his initials, if one were to look hard enough, are carved on a ticket booth. Coming from the Bronx, the Grand Central has family ties for Christine. Another paperweight is special for the sports enthusiast. This is from her father, who attended the first game at the old New York Giants Stadium. Another special family memory on her desk. And yet another paperweight is from the opening of a new public service building in White Plains, New York. That is where her father later rose in the ranks to retire as a captain of the police force. I also found out in talking with her, she and I have something else in common besides paperweights. Her 5-year-old son and my 5-year-old grandson very much enjoy the gavel that we judges have on our bench. And these young men have expressed to us separately what they want to do with that gavel, namely, quote, squash someone on the head, end quote. Neither of us have had the heart to tell them that not only do we not squash anyone with the gavel, we rarely use the gavel. It is more of a symbol than a toy. And with that, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Christine, an outstanding jurist, and I'm pleased to welcome her to Rotary today.
Thank you so much, Judge, and thank you for that very kind introduction. The entire region is certainly indebted to the Rotary Club of Toledo for all of the good work that you do here. So I want to thank all of you for that, and thank you for having me here to be your Law Day speaker. Before I begin, I'd like to share that I moved to Toledo from New York City 16 years ago. And my first day was a little bit of a challenge when my husband, then my fiance, left to go for work. I realized I didn't have a car. With all the other details of moving out here, I didn't really realize that I was going to need to get a car, given that taxi cabs aren't exactly on every street corner out here. But I did what any New Yorker would do moving out to Toledo. I went out and I bought a Jeep. So I would be a legit Midwesterner in Toledo now. And then a few weeks later, when the fuel light went on, I realized I was going to have to learn how to pump gas too. So after I wrestled with the pump and the buttons a little bit, I managed to figure that out. And I have to say, from that point forward, it's been pretty much smooth sailing for me here. I absolutely love to call Northwest Ohio home. I love raising my family here. And my family back in New York loves all of the Mud Hens apparel that I send them as well. Toledo is a city where if you volunteer, you work hard, and you treat people with respect, you can really do anything. And I know that the Rotary Club shares those same values. What is Law Day? I promise you, even though you don't have today off from work for Law Day barbecues or picnics, and there's no Law Day fireworks tonight, today is an actual holiday in the United States. It was started in 1958 by President Eisenhower, and President Eisenhower gave a proclamation, and every US president since then does their own annual Law Day proclamation. Eisenhower's proclamation read, quote, "In a very real sense, the world no longer has a choice between force and law. If civilization is to survive, it must choose rule of law." But still today, in corners of the world, Law Day is nothing to commemorate. In too many nations, the word law is shorthand for the cruel brute force of uncaring power. disconnected from reason, freedom, and justice. In nations without a rule of law, ideas are suppressed, education is lacking, and a select ruling class enriches itself at the expense of a suffering citizenry. But in the United States, Law Day is a celebration, a salute to the tenets of our constitutional republic, majoritarian rule in the political branches of government, while the judicial branch simultaneously protects the rights of political, religious, and racial minorities. Today is a celebration of the rule of law itself. In 2018, I sat as a visiting judge on the Supreme Court of Ohio. Of all things, the case that I heard had to do with the taxation of bobbleheads that are given out at professional sporting events. That particular case had to do with the Cincinnati Reds. The Ohio Supreme Court has a beautiful ornate courtroom, and the justices enter the courtroom from the robing room, which is just on the other side of the curtain. As I was waiting to enter the courtroom by myself, just me and my nerves, because the justices were hearing a case in the courtroom and I was going to enter when they finished, I was struck by a sign that I saw right next to the door that the justices use to enter into the courtroom for arguments. It's almost like the Notre Dame play like a champion sign that the football players tap as they, run out onto the field to play the game. And I was so struck by the sign that I took a picture of it. And I printed out the picture today. And this is the framed photo that hangs on the wall. And it says, "We are in bondage to the law in order to be free." And I thought of that quote today when I was writing the speech, because to me, that perfectly encapsulates the rule of law. The rule of law is a social compact that, if we stick with it, allows each of us to pursue our own dreams. Law shouldn't restrict freedoms, but should promote freedom. For lawlessness would be chaos, which is the opposite of a free society. 50 years ago this week, then Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy said in his Law Day address at the University of Georgia School of Law that the law, quote, links freedom and man. And RFK was right. The law links freedom to man and woman, but only if the law applies equally and fairly to all. If it does, then the rule of law enables commerce, it enables economic liberty. It protects religious expression and political speech. The rule of law protects our property, our businesses, and our rights. The rule of law protects against governmental overreach and ensures privacy in our own homes. Therefore, every day must be Law Day, or else our social fabric would unravel. In Toledo, Ohio, and around the country, we strive to achieve rule of law rather than rule by law, which is essentially rule by force. This is the only way to truly further the cause of freedom and realize a more perfect union. The work of judges and independent judiciary is essential to the rule of law, and I am so honored to be a part of the traditions of that system. As you heard, I'm a judge on the Ohio Court of Appeals, and there are 12 such appellate districts in Ohio, and our district covers 8 counties in Northwest Ohio. Over 310,000 people voted in the election to the 6th District Court of Appeals in 2016 when I was elected. That's more people than voted in Representative Marcy Kaptur's last congressional election. But the voters elected Representative Kaptur and me to do very different jobs. The Congresswoman's role is to represent her constituents. My oath is to the law. I did not take an oath to represent anyone's interest and viewpoints. In fact, when I swore my oath of office, I swore that I would, quote, administer justice without respect to persons. That is the hallmark of the separation of powers. The legislative branch should be responsible to the interest of persons, that is the voters in the district. But the judicial branch isn't concerned with public policy or political polls. It's not that judges don't care about public policy, we do. It's just that judges must have the humility to know our role within the system of government. Our role is to make sure that laws are enforced as written and as intended, and that the laws passed in the constitutional branches, laws passed in the political branches are constitutional. Our system has a separation of powers to preserve checks and balances. Checks and balances ensure that power is not concentrated in one branch of government or one person. This ingenious system of checks and balances doesn't exist for its own sake. The whole idea of the rule of law, the separation of powers, the checks and balances, is to preserve your power. The entire purpose of the rule of law is to further the cause of freedom for ordinary citizens. That's you and me. The rule of law preserves the power of people while simultaneously securing the fundamental civil rights and liberties for all, including political minorities whose views are not espoused by the political majority. The idea is to preserve the freedom of groups like the Rotary to assemble, exchange ideas, pursue civic engagement. It preserves the freedom to marry, worship, read, write, start a business, get an education, own property. We must be free to criticize the government and seek redress of grievances. And above all, the rule of law preserves these rights for everyone equally. The idea is to secure freedom of thought and expression of all ideas, including unpopular ones. For what may be considered unpopular, untrue, or even sacrilege in one place or era may eventually be shown to be the truth. And that is why courts are so important. Our docket at the Court of Appeals frequently involves cases concerning the application and interpretation of laws that are passed in Columbus. These laws theoretically reflect the will of a majority of Ohioans, but political might does not necessarily make right. Whether our laws are valid, whether they are constitutional under the federal and Ohio constitutions, we have two constitutions here, that is for a court of law to decide, not a court of public opinion. Before I cast a vote in cases, I don't hold town halls or consult political advisors or consult opinion polls about what the result should be. And I think you would be rightly appalled if I did. And that gut feeling, that instinctual sense that judges must be independent of political pressure, that captures the hallmark and spirit of the rule of law. But like any spirit, its soul isn't as easily captured in the real world where judges live and exist. But judges must have the integrity to set aside their private views. That is why we wear black robes. And judges must have the spine to not blow with political winds. Now, this is often what the public claims they want from their judges, but simultaneously, many people accuse the courts of being out of step with the times. And of course, out of step is code for the judge didn't reach the result that I wanted in this particular case. But again, courts aren't designed to reflect the will of the majority or do the bidding of any person or political party. Courts are supposed to follow the law, even if the result is unpopular, maybe even especially if the result is unpopular. Yet there's something funny about that in Ohio. There is some tension between the way we select judges in Ohio and the ideals of judicial independence and judicial autonomy. Consider that at the federal level, judges are nominated by the president and confirmed by the United States Senate. If confirmed, a federal judge has tenure for life. Life tenure makes federal judges immune from political pressures. For example, racial discrimination in American public schools was shamelessly prevalent and accepted just 70 years ago. The racial divide in separate schools brought about the famous Brown v. Board of Education case, where in 1954, the Supreme Court of the United States abolished the separate but equal doctrine and said that the right to education must be made available to all on equal terms. This seems obvious now and reflects the moral sense of the nation today. But in 1954, it was unpopular in many segments of society, and it took years for the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board to be carried into effect in real life. Today, we still have de facto segregation in many schools. If the Supreme Court justices had to be popularly elected, would Brown v. Board of Education have been decided differently in the 1950s? Would segregation have remained the law of the land? Or how about the landmark case of Gideon v. Wainwright, which held that states cannot put a poor person in jail or prison without affording the basic right to defense counsel? The idea of taxpayers paying attorneys to represent complete strangers was not popular in many segments of society. Therefore, Gideon was not initially very well accepted. But it's right on the law, isn't it? How many citizens accused of crimes have been exonerated through the right to counsel? How many people would be falsely imprisoned without this now widely accepted constitutional right? Here in Ohio, all judges are elected. The theory behind Ohio's requirement of electing judges is that the people should select judges, not just a select few. This populist system has its trade-offs. It allows for someone like me to take my experience and qualifications to the voters, put myself out there in a public, sometimes very intimidating way, and get elected. And I love my job. And I am so honored that so many voters place this awesome responsibility in me. My sole loyalty is to the law, but for an added dash of drama and fun, all judges, including myself, are up for election every 6 years. Imagine if Clarence Thomas or John Roberts or Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Antonin Scalia or Thurgood Marshall or Elena Kagan were up for election every 6 years. They engage in the exact same type of analysis that we engage in at the 6th District Court of Appeals, with the main difference being their jurisdiction is 50 states, whereas our jurisdiction is 8 counties. Would you want federal judges up for election every 6 years? Well, for better or worse, this is our system in Ohio. Judges run every 6 years on nonpartisan ballots, including Supreme Court justices. Under this system, voters can vote you in or out for any reason they choose, but that includes the right to vote out or vote in judges on purely political grounds, even though the nature of the job is entirely apolitical, even though the judges are the only races on the ballot where political party is completely irrelevant to the work that we do. The only way I can resolve this tension is to honor my oath and to do my job as if I have life tenure, even though I know I must be elected every 6 years, and just have faith that the people, the voters, will understand and appreciate that hard cases sometimes have unpopular results, and that is the work of a judge. Unfortunately, I see a dwindling understanding in today's society of the true role of the judicial branch. In public settings or on the campaign trail, I get questions that touch on a range of subjects that mix the political, the legislative, and the social all together. For example, did you support Trump or Hillary? Would you overturn Roe v. Wade? What do you think about marijuana laws? Do you support the Second Amendment or do you support gun restrictions? The judicial ethics prevent me from answering questions like this in the first place, but these questions also reflect a decline in civic understanding about the role of the judiciary. This decline probably inversely correlates to a rise in partisan media. Modern pundits view American courts as political pawns in a larger game. There is a pervading unfamiliarity with the idea of judicial independence, which is essential to the rule of law. If courts cave to political pressure, perhaps some short-term political gain is made by someone, some litigant, some special interest. But this comes at the expense of the long-term respect for the rule of law. This cannot be blamed all on the media, though. Bad decisions where courts caved aren't a modern phenomenon. For example, the 1944 decision of Korematsu versus the United States, when the Supreme Court shamelessly upheld the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, is an egregious example of a court bowing to public pressure. And today, the role of the judicial branch is also under institutional attack from other branches of government. At the federal level, the White House, the executive branch, has created a commission to study the possibility of reforming the federal judiciary by upping the number of Supreme Court justices from 9 to 13. Does this reflect a true desire for an independent judiciary, or does it reflect and perpetuate a misperception that we already lack an independent judiciary? And right here in Ohio, the General Assembly, the legislative branch, is presently considering legislation that would explicitly turn Ohio judicial elections into partisan affairs. In fact, the bill has already passed the Ohio Senate, despite opposition from the Ohio State Bar Association, the Ohio Judicial Conference, and the Ohio Courts of Appeals Judges Association, of which I serve on the executive board. The reason for the opposition is simple. My judicial colleagues and I do not sit on separate sides of the aisle when we are on the bench. We do not caucus in different rooms. We do not serve a political party or any special interest. Again, the rule of law would break down if we did. Because of civic education, including celebrations like Law Day, the majority of Americans understand this and do generally accept the rule of law, including the importance of true judicial independence. This acceptance has helped this country thrive into an economic powerhouse for beacon for liberty and justice. But for all the high-minded rhetoric of Law Day, I would be remiss if I did not recognize that many inequalities still exist. To quote the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, the true measure of our commitment to the rule of law cannot be measured by how we treat the rich, the powerful, the privileged, the respected among us. The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. The rule of law depends upon equality, but also important is a perception of equality. A system that is not perceived as fair cannot last. Consider this. The World Justice Project is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2006 as an initiative of the American Bar Association. Its mission is to advance the rule of law worldwide. The World Justice Project recognizes that effective rule of law is not some fluffy, abstract ideal. It is perhaps the only real way to prevent corruption, combat poverty and disease, keep the peace, and protect people from injustices large and small. Every year it publishes a rule of law index, which measures the extent to which 128 countries adhere to the rule of law in actual practice. This index is compiled from data collected from more than 130,000 households and 4,000 experts regarding how they view the rule of law operating in everyday situations. Out of 128 countries worldwide, where do you think the United States ranks when our rule of law is critically measured by these political scientists? In the 2020 Rule of Law Index, the United States global rank overall is 21 out of 128. Although we rank generally pretty high in terms of constraints on government powers, absence of corruption, open government, order and security, and regulatory enforcement, we do have certain low scores that cannot be ignored. Out of 128 countries, where do you think the United States ranks in terms of its perceived lack of discrimination in its justice system? Discrimination here meaning whether the overall structure of the justice system in practical everyday situations discriminates based on things like race and socioeconomic status. Out of 128 countries, the US ranks 88th out of 128 in terms of discrimination within the criminal justice system. Now, would you think that civil justice is better or worse than our criminal justice perception? The United States global ranking of the accessibility and affordability of our civil justice system is 109 out of 128. And our rating for lack of discrimination in our civil justice system is 115 out of 128. Now we can debate the accuracy and the methods and the data underlying this index all we want, but we cannot deny that these numbers demonstrate that our justice system is not perfect, or at the very least, it's perceived as being very far from perfect by many people. And there are so many layers to that problem that I couldn't possibly get into all of them today. But I do want to highlight just a few examples of the work in our community that is bringing about positive change in these areas that are so crucial to the rule of law. Regarding the accessibility and affordability of the civil justice system, remember that the United States Supreme Court case that I mentioned earlier, Gideon v. Wainwright, only secures the right to an attorney in criminal cases. There is no corresponding right in civil cases. That is why the work of Legal Aid, ABLE, and the Toledo Bar Association Pro Bono program are so crucial to bridging the justice gap for underserved populations in our community. In addition, groups like the Thurgood Marshall Bar Association, Toledo Women's Bar Association, and the Diversity, Inclusion, and Race Equity Committee of the Toledo Bar Association are doing great work in terms of increasing and enriching diversity of the legal practice. For example, several members of the Toledo Bar Association are working with TPS to start mock trial teams in the public schools. This important extracurricular activity exposes the students to lawyers and judges and gives them early exposure to and connections in a professional field. And right now, this is a program that is only found in suburban areas, but stay tuned. In terms of addressing discrimination within the justice system, one example of positive work that I've seen over the last several years is the increase in attention on implicit bias. Implicit bias are those unconscious attitudes, stereotypes, and beliefs that we all hold that can affect people, that we all hold that can affect how we treat people. I have seen a real focus on implicit bias training for lawyers and judges especially. And if you haven't had a speaker on implicit bias, I think you would find it very eye-opening and very worthwhile. And if you want to learn more yourself about the topic, Google Harvard Implicit Association Test. There are free tests that are designed to measure the strength of your brain's automatic association with certain concepts or groups of people and evaluations like good or bad. I believe that we, meaning all of us, can and should collectively further the rule of law. We all need to make sure that not only are all men and women theoretically created free and equal before the law, but as concerned citizens, we need to foster these ideals into action. The rule of law is fragile and malleable. It has been bent in our nation's history, but principled people have kept it from being broken. Our system depends upon our jealous safeguard of it. What I really wanted to impress upon you today is that the rule of law isn't about ancient texts or traditions, but its ultimate aim is freedom and opportunity for all. In this way, our system depends upon groups like the Rotary Club constantly doing well by doing good. Finally, if you have a dollar bill, look at it. On the back, the seal, the pyramid, it's unfinished, with the eye of Providence and overlooking it with the words, Annuit Coitis, he favors our endeavor. This endeavor was never meant to be completely finished. So let's keep working on it together. Thank you so much for having me here today.
That was lots of loud, silent applause, Christine.
Lots of.
I don't know. I haven't seen any questions from the group, but let me, if I may, toss one to you.
Sure.
COVID has changed the way a lot of courts are looking at how they administer both civil and criminal justice. There are some silver linings. Tell us if your court is looking at likely to make changes such as Zoom or other things that will make the system more accessible for people.
Yeah, we are looking at that. And over the last year, I can explain a little bit how COVID has affected us at the Court of Appeals. First, just a minute on what we do at the Court of Appeals is we review the trial court decisions. We don't have any trials. We don't take testimony. We're not as public facing as trial courts are. But we do have oral arguments. We have them usually have them at our courtroom when, before COVID, once a week. And that is our opportunity to listen to the arguments, usually of attorneys, but sometimes pro se litigants representing themselves, as to why we should affirm or reverse the trial court decision. And then a lot of what we do is very academic. It's reading and writing and researching and writing our legal opinions to decide the cases before us, but also we're writing precedent that is binding within that 8-county area of the 6th district. So when COVID hit, the first thing obviously that affected us was the fact that we couldn't have oral arguments anymore. And with Zoom technology, we've been holding those oral arguments by Zoom exclusively for over a year now. And it has been working out pretty well. And I think that especially those attorneys who have cases before us who are from Norwalk, Bryan, where they have to drive an hour and a half to get to the courthouse for a 15-minute argument. It's really nice for them to not have to do that anymore. But we're anxious to get back into the courtroom. I know that the Supreme Court is still by Zoom. I'm actually sitting next week for a Supreme Court case by Zoom. So that'll be interesting to see how the back end of that, how they do that down there. But going forward, we're going to be looking at how much of this technology do we keep? I mean, we want to be back in the courtroom with the, our black robes and the procedure and the formality of that process. But we recognize that this pandemic has made us all realize that there are a lot of ways that we can really leverage technology to make life and the practice of law a lot more efficient for everybody. So to the extent that we can do that, I think we will utilize some version of these Zoom arguments going forward, but we haven't decided yet. We're waiting for some guidance from the Supreme Court to see what they do. And they haven't made a decision on that yet, but they should within the next month or so.
Christine, can you comment briefly on how it is that you sit on the Ohio Supreme Court, and also maybe tell us the result of the Cincy Red bobblehead case or another case that you found particularly interesting?
Yeah, sure. So the way it works when with any judge, there's certain cases that you can't hear because of a conflict of interest. If you know the parties involved, if there's some reason why you shouldn't be hearing a particular case. And those instances of conflicts arise with Supreme Court justices as well. So if a particular Supreme Court justice is unable to hear a case, they voluntarily recuse from a case, the Chief Justice will then select an appellate judge. There are 69 appellate judges in the state of Ohio. So she draws from that pool of appellate judges to select a judge to sit in the seat of that justice to hear the case and to decide the case with the rest of the with the Supreme Court. And it was really an awesome responsibility and experience for me to go down there and do that. And the case that I heard, it's a tax case, but it had to do with bobbleheads. So it was kind of fun for that reason that, we're considering the taxation of bobbleheads and sporting events. So the issue there was whether or not the Reds bought their promotional items, bobbleheads, towels, all those types of things. If they bought those items for the purpose of reselling them to their fans who come to the game. If they were actually reselling them as part of the ticket price, then they didn't have to pay taxes when they purchased those promotional items. But if they were true giveaways, then they did have to pay tax. The decision of the tax commissioner was that they were just true giveaways. They weren't actually being resold, and the Cincinnati Reds had to pay tax. And the Supreme Court ended up reversing that decision. And that experience is interesting in and of itself because there's 7 justices on the Supreme Court. And I was sitting for Justice DeWine, who at that time was second to last in terms of seniority. And they conference after they hear the case in order of seniority. And so after everybody kind of has their say as to what they think the court should do, then it's a bit of a more free-for-all discussion. So by the time the discussion had come to me to speak my decision, what I thought we should do, everybody, all of the other justices up to that point had said they thought that this was reverse. And I was thinking it was an affirm, and my stomach was, turning the more I was sitting there, that I was going to have to be, I went down to Columbus to to disagree. But then Justice DeGennaro, who at that time was the least senior justice, she agreed that she thought it was going to be affirmed. So the two of us dissented from the decision of the majority. So I joined the dissent. Justice DeGennaro wrote that opinion, and I joined her, and it was reversed.
Bob Savage has his hand up. Bob.
Right.
Somebody will unmute him.
No, I think I'm unmuted now. You hear me?
Hi, yes.
Okay. Judge Christine, thanks for joining us. You did did a very nice job on the presentation. The issue you brought up of electing judges is one I've thought about from time to time and often wondered. And I mean, even for those of us who pay a reasonable amount of attention to news or a little bit politics, you know, how much do we really know about what the judges are even voting on, let alone whether we think they're doing a good job? I've always wondered. And you talked about the differences at different levels of government. Do you have thoughts on where sort of the right places to draw the lines are, and where it makes sense for the populace to vote on judges? And I mean, I've even wondered, like, should lawyers vote on judges? I'm not sure that's the right answer either, but anyway.
It's hard. There really is no perfect solution to the answer of how we should pick judges. All systems have, you know, their pluses and minuses. At the end of the day, I think it's good that we elect judges, but like I said, there is that tension. In a perfect world, I think that perhaps just having open primaries for judges, and then, you know, anybody can run, and then the top 2 vote getters will go to the general election. The problem is that these judicial elections, they come at the bottom of the ballot, and people need to really be educated about judges specifically, because political party doesn't make a difference to what we do. So with the other branches of government, if you lean Republican or Democrat, I mean, you can rely upon those designations to a certain extent to choose your representatives in the executive and legislative branch. But for judges, it really comes down to qualifications, experiences. If they've been on the bench, all of my opinions are published. You know, anybody can read all of the decisions that I either write or the decisions of my colleagues that I sign my name to. So there's lots of information out there for people to review and research when they're selecting judges. So it's a hard thing. There's not a perfect solution here. And you know, states do it all different ways. In some states, they're all appointed. Some states, it's this hybrid system where judges are appointed, but then they have to run in a retention election where it's basically just an up or down vote. Do we want to keep this judge or kick them off? That is interesting to me, but I mean, that's not the system here in Ohio. Under the Constitution, we have to have these elections every 6 years. New York, they're every 10 years. So then you give them a little bit more of a breathing space between the political elections. The 6-year term in Ohio is pretty long compared to the terms of state senators and state representatives. But it could be 10 years. There's a lot of different things that could be done. I'm not sure if I ever answered your question, but it's a hard one.
Okay, thanks.
Dennis, you have your hand up. You're next.
For Dennis, Jim Scheib. Judge, you did a fantastic job, and I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm very, very concerned. I think the silent majority feels that law and order is definitely the way a society stays a society. And we're seeing less and less of that. We see that people want to defund our police. We see that people who are brought in for different crimes and so forth, they stay a very short time incarcerated. I believe very strongly that certainly Black Lives Matter, but I believe all lives matter. We're all people of God, and I think we need to emphasize that. I do not feel that our society right now is going the right way. We need to actually love one another. We need to realize that we all have differences of opinion, but we got to find a common ground. And I think that's where you come in, because you can lead people in times of turmoil that we're having right now, that our country is great because we've been maintaining the law and order that we should have. If people don't like what we have, the boat leaves tomorrow for Venezuela. So that's
Is there a question? Is there a question?
My question is this.
Please.
What is your personal opinion then of having a lifetime appointment like they do in the Supreme Court. Would that suit us as far as the type of law that you see every day?
Well, I mean, lifetime tenure does mean that the judges who are in these federal judgeships are immune from political pressure. They're
Right.
not, they're not tied to anybody, whoever appointed them, whoever voted on, whoever got them there. It is completely independent. And so I think in that respect, it is a good system. On the flip side, you don't have the voters voting on, who they want to be their judges. It's just a few people who are doing the appointing, and then, the Senate doing the confirming. So.
Let me throw you a question that somebody raised by chat. I'm going to rephrase it a bit. With the current political climate nationally and also at our state level, and you've commented on perhaps a civics misunderstanding by some people, and talked about the misperception of judges as political figures. We have some would say, a partisan media that makes it difficult sometimes to find out the truth. And we have executive orders at both the federal and state level that seem to have, according to some, replaced what is appropriate for the legislative branch, and commentary by people pushing judges for a political purpose. It's a different sort of time right now. How do we unravel this current situation, and can we?
I think we unravel the current situation by doing our own homework and not necessarily taking as true each and everything that we, read on Facebook or online or on the news. All of the information is out there, but it does take a bit more of weeding through, I think, right now than ever before, to really get the information that you need to make your own decisions and to form your own opinions about what is going on in the political landscape right now. The problem is that, it just seems like everybody's so at odds right now with each other that, judges are kind of, in the eyes of so many people, kind of swept up into that tension that's going on right now, where they're the independent ones. They're wearing the black robes. They're not part of this mix. They don't care who wins or loses. They just have to decide who should win under the law. But I think it just takes each of us to just kind of take a deep breath and to take the time to do our own research, I guess.
I used to say that in the old days, it was tough to get the news. You had to wait for Paul Revere to ride his horse and get to your town. But really, today, with all the different influences, it may be harder today to find out.
It is. It's hard. There's so much information. It's just information overload, and information from all different kinds of sources, some very partisan and very slanted and some independent. And so you have to wade through all of that to really get to what the actual information is that's trying to get through to you.
One last question, perhaps. John Wasserman has his hand up.
Judge, got a question on some years ago, the Ohio Supreme Court issued a decision on school funding, said it was unconstitutional, and we've been wrestling with that. Could you comment on that and just implementation of your decisions prospectively going forward?
Well, the Supreme Court issued it. I shouldn't really comment on anything specifically, but are you asking about the effect of decisions from the 6th District going forward?
No, the Ohio Supreme Court.
Oh, the Supreme Court.
Right,
Yeah. I can't really comment on that, because that's one of those things that if I get a case before me where I have to apply that particular case to the case before me, because everything that the Supreme Court of Ohio issues is binding precedent for all of the courts of appeals. And so it might, I'm going to have to interpret that case. And so I can't really make any statements in situations like this, where then, I might have to recuse myself, or it might, be misinterpreted as some sort of showing of how I might rule in that case. So I apologize for not being able to answer that question.
Nice try, John. John's a lawyer.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can wrap this up with this comment that I'll make. When I have the privilege of swearing in new citizens, I often have conversations and ask them, why do you want to become an American citizen? And the top three answers are opportunity, freedom, and the rule of law. Thank you, Christine, very much.
Thank you so much, Judge. It was a real honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, Christine, and for a remarkably interesting and informative presentation. As our thanks to you, we'll be sending you a well-known book in Toledo, Historical Tales of Toledo, authored by Rotary past president Clint Mock. We will also make a donation to the Polio Plus Fund in your name. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Great presentation. So now, let us move back to Father Chuck for Chuck's Chuckles.
My wife always prefers the stairs, whereas I like to take the elevator. I guess we are raised differently. I once fell in love with a girl who only knew 4 vowels. She didn't know I existed. 3, 2, 1. A retired Rotarian, we'll call him Tom, and his wife are going to Florida. Early on their drive, they pull over for going they're pulled over for going a few miles over the speed limit, and a female highway patrol officer asks where they're going. Tom said, "What did she say?" The wife turns to Tom and says, "The officer wants to know where we are going." The wife then tells the officer that they're going to Florida. The highway patrol officer now asks how long they were going to Florida for. Tom asked his wife, "What did she say?" The wife said, the officer wants to know how long you're going to Florida for. The wife tells the officer that they're going to Florida for 2 months. The highway patrol officer then asks, where are you coming from? Tom asks his wife, "What did they say?" She turned to Tom and said she wants to know where we are coming from. Judy tells the officer that they're coming from Toledo. The officer thinks for a minute and then tells Judy she once dated a man from Toledo, and he was the most boring, rude, conceited, selfish man she had ever dated. Tom said, "What did she say?" Tom turns to him and says, "She thinks she knows you." President Alex.
Oh, that's beautiful, Chuck.
Got him back.
I've heard that joke somewhere before, but always hilarious. Okay, so next week, Monday, May 10th. Brandon Selhorst, Commissioner of the Economic Development for the City of Toledo. Today we have 2 meetings following this meeting, Water Services and Disability Services. And the program committee actually met before this meeting at 10:45. So appreciate all the committees meeting, staying engaged. And for that, or after that, we're adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.
One of the incredible things about Rotary is knowing that there are people across the world who you can connect with. For me, that's just given me a sense of power in belonging. So I know that I belong anywhere. And I know that I've got Rotary friends everywhere. Knowing that you've got a global reach of people who are like-minded, that's the wow factor.
Rotary is one of the most powerful international organizations that a young person can be involved in. It's one of the world's largest humanitarian organizations, has a membership of around 1.2 million members. It's located in over 200 countries and geographical regions. Pretty much any country you can think of, there'll be a Rotary Club there doing work in the local community, as well as connecting to each other across the globe, working together to make the world itself much better.
As Rotarians, being able to do things like start projects that have global impact. And I always talk to people about end polio now, because we wouldn't be where we are today in terms of polio in this world without Rotarians starting a project. For me, that's the power in everything that we do.
You have this incredible organization, this incredible network at your disposal where you can learn from, engage with, run things through the organization. Rotary has 7 focus areas where it focuses its energy and its time. Those key areas are disease prevention and treatment, peace and conflict resolution, water and sanitation, maternal and child health, basic education and literacy, and economic and community development. And then this year, a new key area was added, which is the environment.
Rotary has changed my life because it's enabled me to help more communities and more people. Rotary is relevant in our own backyards and it's relevant right across the world. I think the way that we're working now as Rotarians and Rotary clubs is really changing, not just because we're in the middle of a pandemic, but because we're really thinking more about how we bring people into Rotary and let people know that Rotary is for them. It's a great way, first of all, to meet people, but also to do good work in your community. It doesn't matter who you are, if you have got a heart and mind for giving and helping communities and working with people, yes, Rotary is for you. That's what Rotary is, so yes, it's for everybody.